Texting.
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 Texting. Texting. Texting. Texting.
Texting.
Texting.
Mark, Will, and Tomek present
Texting.
Hello, all you textual deviants, and welcome to another episode of Texting. This is Season 4, Episode 5, and the text under consideration today is Michael Parenti's lecture, The JFK Assassination and the Gangster Nature of the State. Before we start, though, I want to share a poem from Charles Baudelaire that I recently translated. I'm now reading this book on Baudelaire by Roberto Colasso, and so it has inspired me to go back and pick up my copy of The Flowers of Evil, which has French on one side and English on the other. And so today, in a fit of inspiration, I translated Le Mort Joyeux. Let me read from my translation. The Joyous Dead. This is a sonnet by Baudelaire, translated into English from the French. The joyous dead, in a ground greasy and full of snails, I want to dig myself a profound pit, where I can at leisure stretch out my old bones and sleep in oblivion like a shark in the wave. I hate testaments and I hate tombs. Rather than imploring a tear of the world, alive, I would prefer to invite the crows to bleed all the bits of my filthy carcass. Oh, worms, black companions without eye and without ear, behold coming to you a dead man free and joyous. Vivacious philosophers, sons of the rot, through my ruin go therefore without remorse. And tell me if there is still left any torture for this old corpse without soul and dead amongst the dead.
Very nice reading. Cool poem.
Yeah,
I like
one
that.
of my favorites, perhaps the favorite of mine from Les Fleurs du Mal. Pardon my horrible French pronunciation, but there you are. So I don't know if that connects to our topic, but I frankly don't care. I think it's a nice intro.
Did your translation closely resemble the one that was on the page?
Not at all. Can't say not at all. There are certain echoes of certain phrases, but as is my want, I translate very, very literally as possible without, making it awkward in English. That's what I always do, whether I'm translating from Portuguese or Greek or Latin or French or whatever. That's always my aim, to try to, as Walter Benjamin says, reconstruct the original in another language. That's
reconstruct
how I
more,
do.
like more active than, No,
I'm just it's like you've got the broken vase or vase of the original, right? And then you just piece it together in another language. You're reconstructing it, not just as like an archaeologist would do. So it's like literary archaeology. You're just piecing together the original to try to let the original shine through in the target language, the language of the translator.
And your point being that some translators would prefer to be more active and liberal.
Like most of the translations in this book are like metered, and they rhyme. I don't, and of course the original it's a sonnet that rhymes, and it's in heptameters. I don't try to reproduce that in English, right? I just focus on the
So basically you give diction more power than rhyme.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I never try to reproduce the metrical patterns of the original because I don't think those translate well. Maybe you could maybe you could do like a blank verse translation, but no, I did this with my translation of Fernando Pessoa's message. I mean, same thing. That was originally written in rhymed verse, metered verse, and my translation makes no effort to reproduce that. Yeah, I focus on the diction and the syntax. I try to reproduce even the syntax as closely as possible. But again, if English requires a change to the word order or whatever, I'll make that concession. All right, this is more time than I wanted to spend on that. It was just supposed to be like a little intro to get us into the topic. No real connection, but whatever. So we're gonna do something
centered around death, and we are discussing assassination. So
yeah, so there you go. You found a connection. We're gonna do something different this time. We're going to.
Are we gonna introduce ourselves or no?
Oh yeah, I'm Mark Will in Taipei.
And I'm Umbrella Man in St. Petersburg.
There you go. Now that that's out of the way, we've got kind of a time crunch, so we'll just jump into it after wasting 11 plus minutes on that intro. So we're going to try something different. We're going to actually play the lecture and react to it. Let's see how that goes. Let's see. Share screen. And there we are. Full screen. Here we go.
I've been looking at history, and I've been impressed and depressed by the fact that history is really a chronicle of immense atrocities. What we have in history is the fact that when surplus value develops, when there's more than a subsistence economy, you have some portion of the population that will do everything it can to enslave and to expropriate the labor of the rest of the people, whether it's a slave society, as in ancient Greece and Rome, or feudal society where people were reduced to serfs, or in a capitalist society where people are driven to the edge of insecurity and
oh, that's not good. What's happening there?
Made to work faster and harder. And one of the things that's used in that arrangement is a very conscious instrument of control that's very necessary. And that instrument is called the state. That is, what they do is set up a state, an organization that has as Max Weber, who wasn't a Marxist, as Max Weber called it, an organization that has a monopoly on the legitimate uses of force and violence, on the use of legitimate force and violence. But that's what we have today. We also have developed in modern times some democratic features, some means of trying to fight back and restrain this arbitrary power. What are we trying to say? That along with government, we also have a thing called the state. And along with governance, along with policies, and along with those things, we have this other instrument, even in a democratic state. And that instrument, whether it's in democratic France or democratic England or democratic Germany or democratic Italy or democratic USA or democratic Canada, and all these countries, all of them have these other instruments and agencies that act like a bunch of gangsters, that act repressively, that use surveillance, that use every dirty trick in the book, unequal enforcement of tax laws, name it. The bringing in of drugs into whole neighborhoods and communities, trumped up murder charges, assassination. And that you have in the middle of these democracies, you have the state within the state known as the national security state. And that state is capable of the most unspeakable crimes that you can think of. And those crimes are perpetrated against their own people. They're perpetrated against people all around the world. Not long ago, I got a letter from a woman who's been a community organizer in Chicago. And she said with grief in her heart, she said, I remember the 60s. I remember the tremendous democratic organization and leadership that was developing in the Latino and African American communities. And remember those leaders, and every single one of them today is either dead, shot by the police, or in Marion prison on trumped up charges.
All right. That's part of the intro there. Any comments so far?
I like the. I think it starts out kind of like a standard anti-capitalist speech. I know he's not just condemning capitalism, but doesn't feel that revelatory. I'd say the thing that sticks out is those moments of emotion, which are just kind of entertaining. Act like a bunch of gangsters. So I like how there's this tone shift from like what you expect to kind of just be a standard lecture that is like fairly dispassionate, and then suddenly you get those moments of real heat.
Well, as we learn later, he's not Chomsky, right?
Yeah.
He is a professor, but he's not professorial in the Chomskyan sense of dispassionate analysis. I mean, he's more like an Old Testament prophet thundering against the abuses of the Gangster State, which I like. And by the way,
it's fantastic how he delivers that line, for sure.
Yeah. Well, by the way, we're talking about Michael Parenti, author of this book I mentioned before, The Assassination of Julius Caesar, A People's History of Ancient Rome, and many other works. Michael Parenti is the author of over 250 articles and 17 books, including The Terrorism Trap, History is Mystery, Democracy for the Few, 7th edition, and Against Empire. His writings have been translated into numerous languages. He lectures widely throughout North America and abroad. For more information, see www.michaelparenti.org. And of course, well, I don't know if it's of course, but he is the father of the journalist Christian Parenti. You may have seen him on Jimmy Dore or I don't know, somewhere. But it's a multi-generational family of muckrakers and activists and journalists and, dissidents. As I've intimated, there is some conflict, or there, historically, he's been in conflict with Hanya, or Hana sounds like a New Yorker. Yeah, I think he is from Brooklyn or Queens, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah.
By the way, that chat, I see that chat is on the Riverside text.
Yeah.
Does that mean that like everything is duplicated both in YouTube and on Riverside?
I think so. It's supposed
That's
to be.
cool.
Yeah. So, and we should be on Rumble, but I've yet to connect, and also eventually I'll connect to Odyssey and these other sites, but just haven't been able to, force myself to do that yet. We're being surveilled enough as it is. But yeah, so he did have conflicts not only with Chomsky, but Alexander Cockburn, the deceased former editor of Counterpunch, longtime editor of Counterpunch. And
is that Alexander Cockburn, or is that someone different?
Cockburn. It's pronounced Cockburn, but yes,
but it's spelled Cockburn.
Yeah, okay. Like the burn on your cock.
I was just confused yesterday.
Yeah, it's Cockburn. It's okay. I mean, he is the son of Claude Cockburn, the Anglo-Irish communist journalist and diplomat and man about town. Anyway, yeah, also brother to Patrick Cockburn and what's the other brother's name? I mean, they're all journalists. But anyway, yeah, there was this disagreement. So on the one side, you had Chomsky and Cockburn and others saying, oh, conspiracy theory, what a bunch of bullshit. And Parenti's saying, no, you're ignoring a very important part of structural institutional analysis. So
I think
stop
you're
being
being a
so
bit
condescending.
unfair to Chomsky there.
Well, let's see what he says. Actually, no. Chomsky has been he's quite dismissive of anyone interested in either investigating JFK conspiracies or 9/11 conspiracies, any of that.
Well, I know,
And
but can
his
I explain my point really quickly?
sure,
Well, it's not. I'm not saying. From what I took from this lecture, it wasn't necessarily that. By the way, if it's true, if it's truly that it's in the way that Parenti represented it, let's assume, okay, like because that's all I know, then I still would sympathize with Parenti. But it seemed like Chomsky. It wasn't so much that he thought it was absolute bullshit. Like it's not like he was. Yeah, it's definitely It was definitely the lone shooter. It was more like he doesn't think our attention should be focused on that because he says like the apparatus of the state is
more important.
It's clear
than,
regardless.
Yeah.
And
well,
so the class struggle is what we need to focus on.
That's a fair point, but as is mentioned later, did you just fart, or is that a chair?
Okay, it was something. Yeah.
All right. So, yeah, as we'll hear later, unless I heard it wrong, Chomsky did come out around this time in support of the Warren Commission's finding that, Oswald acted alone.
Okay, I didn't hear that. So,
but yes, on other occasions he has said, that's a distraction, and so you shouldn't waste your time and energy considering that. And he said similar things about 9/11. One of his arguments was, do you think that could have happened? Do you think these people are insane? That was his argument. It's like, yeah, we do think they're insane, and they would do something like that. So what kind of nonsense is that? And Chris Hedges has also been dismissive of people interested in researching 9/11, which okay. I mean, I have on my shelves also a book by Seymour Hersh, what's it called? The Dark Side of Camelot. It's like 500 pages, and nowhere does he question the official narrative. Is like really disappointing. After I read that, I was kind of like, I mean, Seymour Hersh has revealed some important stories. He's done some great reporting, but my goodness, if he really swallows that story whole, that's kind of disappointing. I mean, the Dark Side of Camelot, if you want to read about JFK's sex life and his numerous affairs, then okay, it's just tabloid gossip. But anyway,
I want to add that it's not necessarily that like for me, the reason I wouldn't take a personal interest, or I'm not that engaged with the JFK assassination, is not because I don't believe the conspiracy, but it's just because it already I already see the state cynically, so it's like, that's another thing that, I mean, you know what I'm saying? It's like, what am I going to do by getting super interested in that?
You already assumed that that's probably what happened.
Exactly.
Yeah. All right, well, let's carry on.
But at the same time, I get why someone would be interested.
What's that?
I was just going to say, but I get why someone would really want to prove that convincingly or prove it to themselves. I mean, I'm not judging.
Moralization that took place, the shattering of those organizations. And after those organizations were shattered and demoralized, then in came the drug traffickers. And those drug traffickers, the thing I remember the most about them is that they were aided and abetted by the feds.
One other conflict I wanted to mention, personal and political. So he was in Vermont for a while, Parenti was, and he was good friends with Bernie.
Yeah, I read this.
And then they had a parting of the ways over Bernie's support for Clinton's bombing of Yugoslavia. He's like, what the fuck, man? So he was on to Bernie a long, long time ago. And I mean, even those of us who were half-hearted Bernie bros in, I don't know, 2016 or even 2020. Like, we knew he was shitty on foreign policy, right? Which kind of negates any value he might have. If your foreign policy is shitty, then you're shit, But
I want to ask you, also, he kind of also rattles off all these countries where he puts the word democracy before them, right? He's like democratic Italy. Is he saying that sarcastically?
well, he's saying they have democratic forms, but still embedded within the state is this deep state or this national security state, which subverts any kind of democracy that the society might otherwise have. Like, the democracy's fine unless it interferes with business as usual. Then the deep state's role, the national security state's role, is to come in and fix things for the elites and to maintain the status quo. Let me fast forward a bit to the part where he starts on JFK specifically. How about that?
As you like.
You gonna object to that?
I'm all good with whatever.
Let's see. I think it's right around here. No. Here. Or something like that.
War against drugs is that the government or elements in it are active perpetrators and purveyors of drugs. And what it is so compelling about the JFK assassination is how nakedly the gangster nature of the state is revealed. It is an awakening. And to know the truth about the JFK assassination is to create a delegitimating force that calls into question the entire state system and the entire social order it represents. And this is why for 30 years, the mainstream press has suppressed or dismissed out of hand the findings about JFK's death. The findings of independent investigators like Peter Dale Scott, Harold Weisberg, Carl Oglesby, Mark Lane, Anthony Summers, Philip Melanson, Jim Garrison, Cyril Wecht, and dozens of others. They're called assassination buffs. They're not buffs. Even that word is a limiting and marginalizing and diminishing term. A buff is a kind of a hobby pursuer, you see. It's a kind of a quirky person who follows quirky little interests. Would you talk about Holocaust buffs, would you? No. They are serious investigators of a very serious crime, which leads to all sorts of serious understandings about the criminal nature of the state.
Okay, I think that's a very important point. With this recent dump of JFK documents, you have assholes like Ben Shapiro saying, "Well, who cares about what happened 60-something years ago? I mean, that doesn't matter. That's about as important as who killed William McKinley. I mean, it might be interesting, but it doesn't really have anything to do with anything going on today." So this from the guy who fetishizes the Holocaust, right? Oh, that happened a little bit earlier than the JFK assassination. So we can go back and say that's important and still matters today, but this doesn't. I mean, obviously that's absurd. And so the ridicule of people who have been on this story, from the beginning. He mentioned some of the earliest researchers. Some of those guys and gals have passed, or, in the case of journalist Dorothy Kilgallen, was probably murdered. And, there are others on this list of people who mysteriously died for having an alternative version of what happened. That's unacceptable. That's disgusting. These people are heroes. They're like true journalists. They're true investigators of really important stories. And so, I understand not wanting to go down that rabbit hole in your case, but at the same time, as you say, you don't dismiss those people as lunatics or, fools.
course.
Yeah. All right. So, yeah. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention. This is from 1993. This is when he gave the talk, and this is like 2 years after Oliver Stone's JFK. He'll mention that in a bit. But I remember in 1993, it was my first year of grad school. I had graduated from, undergrad that previous spring. And then I started grad school in the fall. And I remember on Frontline, Frontline on PBS, that fake news show, they did like a 3 hour. This is how I got into it. This is my origin story, people. Every episode must have an origin story. But I watched this. It was like a 3 hour episode on Oswald, and they're like, well, at the end of the day, you just can't. The last word was from like Oswald's brother or something. At the end of the day, you just have to admit that, Oswald did it. My brother did it. And I remember thinking, that's not very convincing. But of course, I was young and dumb and thought, well, I mean, who am I to question that narrative? I mean, it's probably true if even Frontline saying that. So I don't know, but I didn't buy it, to my credit. But I just didn't have the resources to like support my opinion. Just like, before that, I was skeptical of the first invasion of Iraq under, Pappy Bush. I'm like, this sounds like a bunch of shit. But at the same time, I even considered like, dropping out of school and just going over there to have a look at it, like I was Hemingway or something.
Oh, I thought you meant like joining up.
Well, maybe like as so I could write about it or something. I mean, thank whatever gods there may be that I didn't follow through with that stupid, insane, fleeting thought. But
can we have more of the impressions of yourself as a younger, naive version? I think I want to just talk to that guy for a while. He's pretty funny.
It'll come up. But the point is, I was around. I wasn't aware of Parenti, right? I was watching fucking PBS and Frontline and just having questions. Well, they're saying this, but seems kind of suspicious. Where
PBS
are you going to
is a gateway
find?
drug.
Yeah, where are you going to find Parenti? He's on like Pacifica Radio or whatever.
Pacifica is like heroin, and PBS is like weed.
There you go. I didn't know about that at the time, but now, and actually, I didn't discover this lecture until a few years ago. Like I was more a Chomskyan, and now I'm more a Parentian. Is that what we can say? So, and I was a faithful reader of Counterpunch, and I mean, I still think Coburn was a great journalist, but I think this is a blind spot. As we'll see if we continue here.
And this is why they relentlessly, the mainstream media and the opinion leaders and the political leaders of this country relentlessly attack or ignore this literature. And this is why they give fulsome, gushing, ready publicity to the likes of Gerald Posner with his book Case Closed, which got put into every major magazine. I couldn't put the TV on all week without seeing this guy's face and hearing him blather these kind of cliche statements whose credibility are dependent on you being totally ignorant of what the investigators for 30 years have been uncovering and the questions that have been raising. And who did a grotesque, idiotic whitewash of the whole thing. And this is why they savaged Oliver Stone's movie, JFK, a movie that was very accurate about the specifics of the murder.
Okay, so too bad we don't have Joe here to talk about Oliver Stone's JFK. I'm not sure he's a fan. I am. I've watched it multiple times. I've like shown it. I've introduced people to it. I think it's one of the greatest, political thrillers of all time, modeled after Z. I don't know if you've ever seen that. That's a great
Is
film.
it set up like a documentary, or how is it presented?
Well, Stone calls it a counter myth to, counter the official myth, which is absolutely a myth. So it's fictionalized, but they're like, it's quite historical, and he consulted these JFK conspiracy buffs that Parenti alludes to. But it's also a well constructed drama. Like it's just a fascinating,
and
gripping film.
Puts forth an argument, or it's more about questioning?
It's more about questioning. I mean, the focus is on Jim Garrison, the New Orleans DA that did a lot of investigating, and then eventually indicted, I guess, one of the alleged conspirators, and he lost the case, but like he shifted public opinion. Like no one believed the official story, and actually Stone's movie led to some legislation being passed, despite all the efforts of people like, George Will of the, no relation to Mark Will, George Will of the whatever fucking paper he wrote for. He's the guy that Jim Hightower famously said he's the kind of guy that dumb people consider a smart person, or something like that. Dumb people consider him one of the smart people because he wears glasses and parts his hair in the middle and has a bow tie or whatever. But he said something like, "Oh, this is an exercise in bad citizenship." He said that about Oliver Stone's film, and also Don DeLillo's book Libra, which is all about Oswald and the JFK assassination and the conspirators. So,
but again, it doesn't put forth a separate version.
Stone's film,
right?
Well, I mean, by implication, it does. Like, I mean, it talks about characters like David Ferry, who had all these connections to these anti-Castro militia groups. It talks about, obviously, Jack Ruby, a.k.a., well, his actual name is Jacob Rubenstein, who was affiliated with the mafia in Chicago and also may have had ties to Israeli intelligence. And that's a new aspect of the story I learned about recently. Oliver Stone doesn't get into that at all. I mean, it's such a glaring omission that people like Sam Husseini have said it was kind of a limited hangout to like distract people from Israel's possible role in this. That's something, again, as I say, that's something I learned about recently. But JFK was in conflict with the Ben Gurion because of their secret nuclear program. He's like, you cannot do this. We're coming to inspect. And then Ben Gurion resigns, and a new prime minister takes over, and they say, you can't come visit now because it's a transitional phase. So could you just give us a couple more months? And then he was dead before he could visit. And he and his brother were also insisting that AIPAC, or the forerunner of AIPAC, register as a foreign agent, before they became the power that they are now, owning basically every member of Congress and clearly the president too. Not just AIPAC, but there are other lobbying groups and just random billionaire donors like Miriam Adelson, right? So definitely they had a motive. And now with this new dump of information, we find out that James Jesus Angleton of the CIA was he had the Oswald file on his desk 1 week before the assassination. So Oswald was definitely a CIA asset or informant or something, and had been for years. And the number 2 guy at the CIA was well aware of that. And the interesting thing is, he was very close to Israeli intelligence. So much so that to this day, I learned this recently, there's a statue of this motherfucker in Jerusalem. There's a statue of James Jesus Angleton of the CIA in Jerusalem. How does that happen? Pretty crazy.
So again, but with regards to the actual gunman, what does the movie say?
Oh, that Oswald's a patsy. Like he
pulled the trigger?
No, he didn't. He couldn't have even been where they said he was.
Do they have a character playing the gunman? I mean, do they have someone?
Well, the implication is that the guys on the grassy knoll shot him. There were these guys dressed as bums that mysteriously were walking away, and people saw gun smoke from the grassy knoll. But the character of Oswald is played by Gary Oldman, so he's actually in it. But it shows him not being able to. It goes through a whole. I think it's during the trial scene. It shows how he couldn't possibly have gotten up to this. I think it's the 6th floor window of the Texas Book Depository. It wouldn't have been possible because someone saw him on the 3rd floor or whatever at a certain time, and the time he was supposedly up there wouldn't have given him time to run up the stairs and pull the trigger and then run down the stairs and end up at the movie theater where they apprehended him.
Isn't the idea also that bullets went through different parts of his head, from different directions?
Yes, the magic bullet, So that's ridiculed in the movie too. It's that's some bullet and actually Parenti gets into that as well. Let's let him continue.
A movie that reached millions of people, that broke through that thing that they were keeping down. The only movie in the history of Hollywood, and I wrote a book called Make Believe Media, which is about TV and film, so I think I know something about films. At least I did spend the better part of a year reading a lot of literature. It's the only movie that I know of that was attacked 6 months before it was ever released. In the Washington Post and in the New York Times and in Time.
I think I remember that. It would have been around the same time that Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ was also attacked in the media at the local mall. It's good. Bowie's in it as Bowie is Pontius Pilate. Willem Dafoe is a good Jesus.
I'd like to see that.
Yeah, it's worth seeing. I mean, and what's his name is Judas, Harvey Keitel.
What's the angle in that film?
I mean, it's based on Kazantzaki's novel, which I haven't read, but it's basically that Judas is the truest of the disciples, but he thinks Jesus betrayed his message. Actually, I don't remember it well. But the thing is, I do remember the controversy surrounding it. And so at the local mall, this guy had a booth set up, demanding or asking people to boycott it. And I just walked by and I got into an argument with the guy. He was ex-military, but born again, right? And he was telling me, he was just shaking his head with pity, Mark, when you die, you're going to be all dressed up with nowhere to go. Because I didn't accept his version of Jesus as my personal Lord and Savior. And I wanted to see the movie, so obviously I was going to be damned to hell. Is it sympathetic
to Jesus, this film?
Yeah, I would say so.
So ultimately, Jesus is in Jesus Christ Superstar, that it was a controversial portrayal, but Jesus is still basically heroic in that movie. So is it similar in Last Temptation of Christ? It's
I think so, but now that you mention it, I don't even remember what the last temptation was. Like, was he tempted by
Mary
the
Magdalene?
devil? Yeah, was it sexual with Mary, and is that why Judas was upset? I don't even remember. It's all confused in my mind because I'm now working on a translation of the Gospel of Mark, as I think I mentioned, and there's this verse I mentioned. I think I said this last time. Verse. It's chapter 14, verses 51 through 52. Jesus is like naked in the Garden of Gethsemane with a boy or a young man. I mean, Jesus is not naked, but the boy is naked, and it's like, what? So, um, yeah,
That's
there's
just his.
that.
That's just his pre-fall of man state.
Yeah, I mean, rationalize it as you will. It's an interesting mystery. All right, here we go.
Time and Newsweek, and attacked relentlessly for a year after it was released. And this is also why in this past week they kept up the relentless propaganda campaign with the 30th anniversary of the Kennedy assassination to show that Oswald was the lone assassin. And they're always limiting the question, just as the Warren Commission did a priori, was Oswald a lone assassin? Did he act alone? Did he or did he not act alone? Meanwhile, all the serious investigators have a different question. It's not that. He was not at all one of the people who shot Kennedy. He did not act at all, although he was involved in another way. He was involved as a fall guy.
All right, let's skip to the part where the focus is Oswald. He talks quite a bit about Oswald, so let me just move to the 16:40 mark, somewhere around there.
Right there, terrific, written 25 years ago. Let's focus on a small part of the actual conspiracy. I can't obviously go through it all. It would take ages. Let's start with Oswald. If you watch television this week, you again, for the 78th time, heard that Oswald was a loner, and incompetent, not very bright. You heard he was emotionally disturbed. Gerald Posner got on there, turning instant psychiatrist, and he said, Lee Harvey Oswald was a very disturbed young boy. He had a very disturbed childhood, and he was a passive-aggressive. I said, a passive-aggressive? A passive-aggressive assassin? How does that work? That explains why he used a rifle which couldn't shoot straight. He also was a leftist. Alexander Coburn has joined the right and the center, and in a column in the Examiner said he was a leftist. The truth is something else. Lee Harvey Oswald, all his IQ tests show that he was above average intelligence. He was a bright guy, a quick learner. Lee Harvey Oswald spent most of his adult life not as a lonely drifter, but directly linked to the U.S. intelligence community. At the age of 18 in the U.S. Marines, he had secret security clearance, and he was working at Marine Air Control in Atsugi base in Japan. Atsugi was a top secret base where the CIA launched some of its U-2 flights and did other kinds of covert operations in China. The next year, at the age of 19, he was assigned to El Toro Air Station in California with security clearance to work radar. And here he emerged, certain strange things began to happen. He emerged as a babbling Russophile and Soviet communist. He started playing Russian language records at blast level in his barracks. He started addressing his
That
fellow
sounds like you.
Marines in Russian. He read Russian books and touted Soviet communism as, quote, the best system in the world. He called his fellow Marines comrades. Now, the U.S. Marine Corps in 1958 was not exactly known as a bastion of liberal tolerance and free thinking. My buddy Bernard Livingston wrote a book called Closet Red. He tells of his experiences in the Army where they had to filter out anybody who had funny opinions, who had pinko-ish opinions or whatever else. They had to be reported. That the Army constantly, and I'm sure the Marines constantly, surveils anybody who might outspokenly or actively begin to say or act certainly in the way he did. But in this instance, Oswald's Marine commanders didn't mind. He kept his security clearance. He kept all the radar records. He could see what was going in and out and knew all about the things that were happening there. And a wealth of sensitive radar information and other highly sensitive information from sensitive bases, black operations as they were called. Well, if Oswald was a Soviet spy or a Cuban spy, as some people now claim, he certainly had a novel way of building a cover. Other odd things began happening. In February,
It's almost like a George Carlin bit, you know? It's almost like stand-up he's doing as he lectures. Or someone like Mort Saul, who actually, his routine, he would just read excerpts from the Warren Report as comedy, you know? So there's an element of that. I think he's quite an engaging speaker.
February 1959, Lee Harvey Oswald failed the Marine Corps proficiency test in Russian. 6 months later, he was practically fluent in Russian. Only in 1974, a document that was dislodged from the Warren Commission that had been secreted, thanks to Howard Weisberg's legal efforts, got the document out. It was shown that Oswald had attended the U.S. Army Monterey School of Languages. Now, Monterey is not open to anyone who just happens to have a hobby, a language hobby. You go only for serious training, and you are sent by the government, and it must be related to government work in a language picked by the government, which is related to specific assignments. So Oswald learned Russian at the U.S. Monterey School of Languages. Another odd thing, Oswald was given an early discharge from the Marines because his mother had injured her foot. That's called a dependency discharge. Your parent needs you. A jar had fallen on her toe. And he put in the request and he got it within a week. His fellow Marines were astonished at the velocity of the release. It also so happened that the jar fell on her foot a year before the discharge. But she was happy. It wasn't healing right, you know. This was only one of a number of very strangely favorable treatments that the U.S. government began to give Lee Harvey Oswald. He then defected to the USSR. But how? Philip Melanson raises the question. To get to Russia in those days, it would have cost $1,500. Lee Harvey Oswald's bank account showed a deposit of only $203. After he arrived in London and was there, he left London and went to Helsinki on October 11, on a day when there were no available commercial flights that would have allowed him to make it in one day. He had some kind of private transportation to get to Helsinki. In Russia, he announced that he was renouncing his U.S. citizenship and that he had lots of secrets that he was going to give to the Soviets. He even went into the U.S. embassy and announced that and made sure they all knew it. The Soviets didn't bite. They let him stay, but they at no time thought he could be an agent of any use to them. They kept him under constant surveillance. He worked in a factory. He showed no particular interest in guns, but he belonged to the factory's gun club. He used to join in the rabbit shoots, and he could never hit the rabbit. Always someone had to come behind him and shoot the rabbit while he was firing. Otherwise, they would have been there all day. It was a joke. He was a miserable marksman, as he had been in the U.S. Marines. He had been flagged again and again he missed the whole target a number of times. You get the flag. So Lee Harvey Oswald's show was couldn't hit the side of a barn. Now, if Lee Harvey Oswald was really a defector and not a U.S. spy, then U.S. intelligence could well have taken the view that his was one of the most damaging defections in history. Now, what's done in all defections, especially definitely those connected with government and military, is that there's a damage assessment. No damage assessment was ever made on Oswald's defection. This did come out in the Warren Commission and the House Select Committee. There was no damage assessment? Guess it was just overlooked. We don't know. After 2.5 years, he applies to return to the U.S. This is after renouncing his citizenship, announcing he was going to give away secrets. And instead of being grabbed when he comes out and tried as a traitor, the U.S. accepts him back. And he says he was never debriefed. In fact, he was debriefed in Holland. in Amsterdam, but the CIA has no record of debriefing him, doesn't know who he is, never touched him, was never near him. And their explanation before the commission was that there were so many tourists coming in and out, that there was nothing particularly about him that would catch our attention. One might wonder what is needed to catch your attention. A defector, secrets, all that.
Any comment on this background info about Oswald that, of course, no one ever talks about?
It's a remarkable story if it's all like he says it is. You know, I mean, and the ease with which he fully immerses himself into life in Russia, that's just crazy to visualize.
And he brings back a Russian bride. He gets into this later, and she immediately is granted a green card or citizenship or whatever. No problem, no problem. And, you know, they had handlers in Dallas. The movie gets into that, and basically, you know, any source you can think of. This book, for instance, JFK and the Unspeakable, it's mentioned at the very end, but, you know, the suspicious connections Oswald has with government officials and like weird things at the Mexican embassy, people that were pretending to be Oswald but couldn't have been the Oswald that was in Dallas. So yeah, I think that's pretty well documented. Here's another great book, The Devil's Chessboard, Alan Dulles, the CIA and the Rise of America's Secret Government by David Talbot. This other
so do you
one was
consider
by
yourself a JFK
James
conspiracy
Douglas. I mean, yeah, I guess if someone wants to apply that term to me, I don't mind.
buff? And what is it that titillates you about this particular incident?
I just think that's basically like maybe it occurred long before that, but that's basically the end of any kind of pretense of the American dream being a reality, you know. Like that was that
why that
November 22nd, 1963 marks, that's like an important date marking the complete capture of the, you know, fake democracy by the national security state. Exactly what he's talking about. I mean, it probably occurred before that. Like we know that Eisenhower was basically controlled by Alan Dulles, the subject of this book, and his brother. At the end, he said, you know, I leave a legacy of ashes, because he realized he got played by the Dulles brothers, one of whom was CIA head, the other of whom was his Secretary of State. And they worked together to, you know, they did the coup in Iran, Guatemala, all of that was under him. So at the end, even though he was complicit in all that, at the end of his presidency, he delivers his famous military-industrial complex warning speech, right? But too little, too late. So it had already happened. The coup had already taken place, but, you know, JFK was kind of pushing back, and like he fired Alan Dulles, and he, in a moment of anger, he said, I want to splinter the CIA into 1,000 pieces or whatever. And then they splintered his head into 1,000 pieces. Now he backed off on that. He installed like one of his loyalists as head after Dulles, but he like all the employees were still reporting to Dulles. Dulles was still running the show, even though he wasn't officially the head anymore. And Kennedy's appointee was just like ignored. They just fed him bullshit and said, yeah, everything's fine, boss.
I heard some statistic, I can't remember. I didn't prepare much for today, but I watched a recent Breaking Points interview with the JFK historian
Jefferson Morley.
Right. I watched a little bit of the Glenn Greenwald discussion, and then I went back and watched a little bit of the Oliver Stone Joe Rogan. And,
Oh, yeah.
I heard somewhere that they released the actual number of CIA agents abroad, and it was like 40. It's like it's classified, but it's something like 40 to 45% of all like I don't know like what exactly the 40% is of, but clearly
Like-
what they were insinuating is like it's a huge amount of CIA agents running around.
Yeah, like the people in the embassies, that are supposed to be
Yeah,
diplomats.
that's what they were talking about. Yeah.
Yeah, they're supposed to be diplomats or clerical workers or whatever. They're fucking CIA. And it's probably more than that now, Like when
These people that are those, I mean, what jobs do they claim to have in most cases? Like you mentioned, obviously, like diplomat or diplomat affiliated or adjacent, but I mean, are teachers? Like we always joke around, like,
Oh,
but
I wouldn't be surprised. I've met some sketchy motherfuckers here in Taiwan. I don't remember so many being in Korea, but maybe I wasn't aware of it then.
But I mean, are you going to be a CIA agent and be putting in like hard 8-hour teaching days? It's not.
I tell you what. There's a guy who was part of our program here, and he meaning the public school teaching program in Taipei City, and he was like openly telling people that he was some kind of, I don't know if he was Green Beret or what, but basically he was saying, yeah, like we did these special ops in Thailand. He was like openly talking about how he was basically part of a death squad. Like they were like assassinating people. I mean, and this guy's like a public school teacher in Taipei, and also supposedly he was a psychiatrist on the side, even though he had mental problems himself. Clearly, he was like a psychopath. So, what the fuck was that? That always seems suspicious. I mean, I don't have proof of anything, but he was certainly a sketchy character. And he's openly saying, I mean, maybe he's just a braggart. I don't know why he would think that would impress anyone, but like he's openly saying that it's like a provocation. It's like he's trying to trick people into confessing something, like, oh yeah, really, man, oh that's awesome, man, can you like hook me up with some shit like that? I want to be part of that. Maybe he's like trying to recruit people or incriminate people. I mean, it was so strange. I just kept my distance. I knew a guy that was like friendly with him, had dinner with him and hung out with him, and then he said he flaked out on him one too many times, and he weirded him out because he was talking about like assassinating people and special black ops and that kind of thing. So wouldn't surprise me.
Since you're a couple of months older than me,
just a few,
yeah, and your American roots are a bit more stable than mine. And,
are they?
Well, I mean, in the sense that you were like, your parents both identify as American. You were born in America.
Oh,
so
in that sense, yeah.
I'm just saying you're a bit more American than I am.
Were you not born in the States?
No, man. I was born in England.
Okay, I didn't know that.
Yeah. So, and the fact that you grew up in Texas, like, do any of these factors, you think, make you feel like a closer connection to this assassination? Because for me, it is like very abstract and historical.
Well, maybe. I mean, I have been to Dallas. I went in 2013, which was the 50th anniversary, just to check it out. And like I walked the parade route, and I went into the Texas Book Depository. I went to the museum. I went to where Jack Ruby's club was. It's no longer in existence. I went to the courthouse where Ruby shot Oswald, just to get a feel for it. Went and explored the area around the grassy knoll.
And what about like?
But
Can you?
it's just. But as I say, I just think, it marks a turning point. It's like that particular date. It's like all pretense of the bullshit. I mean, it was always bullshit. It was always nonsense.
Well, I mean,
from the
America's
beginning.
a slave state,
Exactly. Exactly. But just, like, it takes something to get you to wake up, right? For me, it was the Iraq War. Okay, that was like the birth of my political consciousness. Before that, I was
the first Iraq War.
No, the George W. Bush the second. That one. And also 9/11, that always, like, when that happened, I'm like, they didn't do that without some assistance from people on the ground. That's fucking, I never believed that official story. And then they use that as a pretext for war. I'm like, what the fuck is this? I'm supposed to, I mean, I was insulted by it. It's just like, do you think I'm that big of a fucking chump that I'm going to go along with this? Fuck you, motherfuckers. So it's just, to me, it's like an insult. It's outrageous. You're gonna feed me bullshit and tell me it's chocolate cake. It's like, it's insulting. It's outrageous.
Okay, I get it. I'm just curious about this assassination, like, as a moment of the American folklore.
I just think there's.
Did you ever have conversations with it with your parents? Do you remember how it was introduced by your history teacher? Do you remember any of that? That's interesting.
I didn't get interested until much later, and I remember that trip to Dallas. I was talking to my dad about how I was going there, and or maybe it was after. And when I came back, I was just telling him stuff. He's like, "Oh, you know a lot about this." I'm like, "Yeah, why don't you? Like, you're the one. You think you know? You think you no.
But he doesn't have a responsibility.
Yes, he does. He thinks he knows about politics. He thinks he knows about what's what. He's trying to argue with me about the Iraq War, and like, well, we're going over there for democracy. And then I would point out something to him. He's like, well, I don't believe that. I'm like, because you don't want to. You're not really interested in knowing. You just want a comfortable fairy tale. So, yeah, I think I'm offended by that. I think it's outrageous. You can't.
How did that conversation end?
As usual, well, I just can't talk to you if you're going to take that tone. Okay, snowflake. Yeah, I mean, I have no patience for that. It's fucking disgusting. Come on.
Come on, man.
Come on, man. You want to get into that with me? I mean, that's usually how it starts, right? Some stupid nonsense about, well, did you hear what Trump did? He's really taking it to them liberals. Okay, you want to start that? You want to start a political conversation with me?
So when you went to Dallas for this anniversary, was there much evidence of the assassination being like commodified? I mean, was it like a tourist event?
It's like, my brother aptly described it as Disneyland for conspiracy theorists. There's some of that, like a lot of these people have their booths set up. They're selling books. There's like commemorative, I don't know, T-shirts or souvenirs or whatever. There's an X on I guess it's Elm Street,
What does that mean?
Marking the spot. That's the spot where he got shot. X marks the spot, and you can, as I say, you can walk over to the grassy knoll. You can walk over to the other side. You can see the overpass. You can walk up there if you want to. You can go into the book depository. There, you can go to the museum. Courthouse is there. As I say, Ruby's Club, where it was, is nearby.
I know that I'm kind of like driving this direction right now, but it's because it's it's my right as an American.
Absolutely.
So, with regards to this latest trove of documents that's been released, I haven't really followed the case much. Can Is there anything particularly significant about what's been released? Because I heard that they haven't actually redacted a lot of the juicy stuff.
Well, they redacted. There's something redacted in brackets, and again, this is based on reports I've heard. I haven't engaged with the actual
You haven't
documents.
poured over the 66,000 pages?
Right. No, I haven't. But allegedly there are these bracketed there's something in brackets that's all been redacted, blacked out. That was released this time, but stupidly it was released before, and we know what was in the brackets. It said something about Israel. So that's now been redacted, even though we already had it before, apparently. So that's one new thing. They redacted something that was previously not redacted.
I think I used the word redacted wrong. Redacted is held back.
Yeah.
Okay, my bad.
Yeah.
So
it's usually blacked out.
Okay.
Yeah, just like the so-called Epstein files that Pam Bondi released. That one is like a page of nothing but black, rectangles. Like every line is blacked out.
So how much of this...
for national security and for the privacy of the individuals involved. So wait, let me just finish. So there's that. Okay. That's that weird thing. Then, as I say, the James Jesus Angleton connection. We now know that Oswald's file was on his desk. And then there's a letter from Arthur Schlesinger, who was part of Kennedy's Brain Trust. He was I think a history professor at Harvard, maybe. And anyway, he was advising Kennedy, and basically he sent him this memo saying the CIA is out of control. They're a state within the state. And that's when all this, I think he's the one who first cited the statistic about the, embassies with the CIA people. So that's new, apparently, according to authorities like Jefferson Morley, who, also says, hey, I haven't had time to look at everything, but these are the things that we've picked up on.
And to what extent do you think this release came about because of RFK, or is that not?
He may have had an influence, or maybe Trump is just trying to pacify some people, give them a little bit of nothing. It's not like revelatory. It's not like new. Like we could have guessed that James Jesus Angleton was involved. In fact, if you look in the index here, I'll bet he's mentioned. But because we know he was close to Dulles, and Dulles fingerprints are all over it. Fucking Dulles ends up advising the Warren Committee. It's like the prime suspect takes control of the report, so it's a total cover up. James Jesus Angleton right here, and assassination plot, having authority over assassinations on Oswald, poet spy. So he's in here. We knew about him, And
is
Trump knew about him.
Gonna have, or is he already in significant conflict with the deep state or CIA? Because isn't that one of the narratives about Trump?
Yeah, but do you believe that was a legit assassination attempt, or there were two legit assassination attempts in the summer? I
don't know.
Well, I don't know. I don't know either.
He was shot, right? So that's isn't that pretty hard to choreograph?
That's what was seen on TV. But as I think it was Ryan Dawson pointed out, like instead of covering him, like the Secret Service agents covering him and removing him quickly, they allow him to stand up and pump his fist and say "fight." When for all they know, there's the same active shooter and maybe others that are going to take him out. So his ear gets nicked. Oh, that was convenient. And then instead of covering him and rushing him off the stage, they allow him to stand up, pump his fist, and say "fight."
So what's the alternative? He's got a ketchup packet there.
It could be. It could have been completely staged. I don't know.
But I'm just saying that's pretty complex too, isn't it? I mean, how do you? know what I'm saying?
How about the other story? That's pretty complex too. That through sheer negligence, this guy was allowed to climb up this building with a gun. People in the crowd were saying, "Hey, there's a guy over there with the gun," and they were ignored. He's able to get up there, position himself on a sloping roof, and shoot at the
that seems to
president.
suggest that it was being like endorsed by
Okay.
powers that be.
Okay, maybe it was. Maybe that's what happened. And Trump is a hero who defied the deep state, and
It doesn't necessarily make him a hero, but it just does bring out the fact that there is this tension.
And that's another thing. Maybe, as Whitney Webb says, maybe it's just factionalism. Like one part of the CIA did want to take him out, and another part was fine with him because they knew he's going to do all the wars and do Israel's bidding, you know? So I don't know. I don't have an opinion about that, but I do think it's suspicious that instead of ushering him off the stage, he's allowed to stand up, pump his fist, and say, "Fight, fight, fight," and get the perfect campaign photo. His bloody ear
awesome,
with it.
Though.
His bloody ear with his fist. Exactly.
It was epic, bro. It was absolutely epic.
So almost too good to be true,
well,
right?
Maybe. But you know, I don't know.
I'm not saying
Arsenal player scored some pretty glorious free kicks
on
the
weekend,
saying, you know.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that it was or wasn't this or that. I don't know. I've not investigated that closely.
Okay, my question is, he's openly criticized the FBI, right? Quite a bit, or is it the CIA? Like is he one of the first presidents ever to kind of name, what do you call that? Like name drop them so much in like a negative way.
Call them
out.
out.
Or name drop. But like, which organization has he called out? Is it both CIA and FBI? I don't know.
I think so at various times. Yeah.
Because that's interesting, right?
Sure. But again, there maybe, you know, the ruling class always has factions, right? Like they're competing with one another over the spoils. I mean, Kennedy himself, as Parenti will mention, is like one of the elites, but they took out one of their own because he was a problem. And maybe someone tried to do that with Trump because he's a problem for many people in various ways, right? Like they tried to Russiagate him. They tried lawfare against him. So maybe they took the next step and tried to use violence. Lawfare, all those lawsuits. Remember, he was
never
like
heard the word lawfare.
Yes, that's what they were calling it. Instead of warfare, it's lawfare. So it's like what they did to what's his name, Lula. What they did, and then Bolsonaro, right? So they instead, because you know assassinations are messy, right? It's better if you can do a scandal. Okay, that doesn't work. Try lawfare. Then, as a last resort, you know, try violence, and maybe that's what happened. I don't know.
I'm saying, like, did JFK ever openly, like, we know, as you referenced, he did like call out the CIA, but that was in a personal correspondence, right? I mean, or that was like behind closed doors. Did he ever like openly?
Well,
call them out?
As we now know, he asked Schlesinger to investigate, and that he got this report, which is saying they're out of control.
Yeah, but he wasn't like saying that in press conferences the way that Trump will. So that's yeah.
I mean, it's also a different era, right? Like things were more buttoned down then, and you didn't have like all of these alternative media sources and the craziness of Twitter. You didn't have fucking JFK tweeting, you know? It's like a different media landscape. Yeah. It's a different, you know, there are only 3 major TV networks. And
well, I guess I'm trying to like wonder if, you know, we see legacy mainstream media kind of be significantly affected by the new digital landscape, right? So, and we see everybody talks about like the rising power of like the digital billionaires and so on. So is this a moment where the deep state, or the security state, as Parenti calls it, is this a moment where they're genuinely in jeopardy of losing their monopoly on power?
Oh, I doubt it. I mean, this is why I'm skeptical of the narrative that the deep state really tried to kill Trump, because he ain't gonna do shit. I maybe there's some that are upset and worried about his rhetoric, but probably most people realize he's gonna serve the ruling class very faithfully.
Right, but as you said, there are always factions, and so he might serve a different share of the ruling class, which might not be the CIA.
And that's why we have to admit the possibility that maybe that really was a legit assassination attempt. Maybe, that's not impossible. But at the same time, it's not impossible that the whole thing was weirdly staged, and
that's very impressive. If so, bravo, tip of the hat.
It's not impossible, but it's quite an interesting coincidence that the bullet just happens to nick his ear. I mean, someone in the crowd did get injured, so I guess it was live ammunition somewhere.
Did someone die or something?
I think so. I think someone got injured, may have died. Again, maybe I should investigate that further, but I just rightly or wrongly, just believe that JFK was a much more legit threat to the national security state than Trump is. I think he's a willing servant of it.
And it seems like one of the pushbacks that Chomsky was providing was that Kennedy is not worth expending this much energy on because he's absolutely just a repetition of what came before, right?
Right. But as this book very convincingly demonstrates, he was changing. There's a whole list of things, like the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was talking to Khrushchev. He wanted to talk to Castro. Some people say that one of his mistresses gave him LSD and he had a spiritual experience.
Nice.
I think that's quite possible. He himself had been in war, unlike, clowns like Trump. He actually knew what it was to be shot at and to kill other people. He almost drowned out in the Pacific Ocean or wherever he was. Some of his crew members did. He was respected by his fellow Navy buddies or whatever.
So listeners, Mark Willis just outed himself. He truly is just yearning for a lost messiah. This is all a Camelot yearning. Some terms that I pulled up from the lecture as well. I really liked this idea of the Camelot yearning. I hadn't heard that before.
That's total nonsense. I'm just saying, I agree with Parenti, whom we should allow to speak further. But so maybe this is enough on Oswald. I want to go to the part where he talks about Chomsky and Coburn. How about that?
As you like, sir.
Yeah, just in the interest of time.
I'm a mere vessel.
We'll put the link to... This is really annoying how I have to drag this. Let's see. Right around here, maybe.
Them to do. There are even some on the left, like Noam Chomsky and Alexander Coburn, who argue that this whole interest in the assassination comes from a Kennedy revival, a Camelot yearning, the yearning for a lost messiah. I'm giving quotes. These are quotes right from Chomsky. Coburn and Chomsky and others, they challenge the notion that Kennedy was assassinated for intending to withdraw from Vietnam or undo the CIA or end the Cold War. These things could not have led to his downfall because they were not true. Kennedy was a Cold Warrior, a counterinsurgent who wanted a military withdrawal from Vietnam only with victory. I have argued similarly in my book, Democracy for the Few, that in fact, indeed, Kennedy was a Cold Warrior and a counterinsurgent, and that he should not be romanticized as a progressive. Chomsky, Coburn, and others claim that the change of administration that came with JFK's assassination had no large-scale effect on policy, not even on tactics. In other words, if Kennedy had lived, he likely would have fabricated a Tonkin Gulf casus belli. He would have introduced ground troops in a massive land war, as Lyndon Johnson did. He would have engaged in the merciless B-52 carpet bombings of Laos, Cambodia, and Vietnam, as Richard Nixon did. He would have risked destroying his own electoral base, proving himself a mass murderer as bad as Nixon. Chomsky and Coburn don't tell us how they know that. All we know is the one surviving Kennedy, the Robert Kennedy, in fact, went a different way. He became an anti-war critic. He opposed the war. He broke with the Johnson administration, and he said that his brother's administration, his administration, had committed terrible mistakes. The evidence we do have, in fact, is that John Kennedy observed Cambodian neutrality and negotiated a ceasefire and coalition government in Laos, which the CIA refused to honor. They preferred to back a right-wing faction that continued the war. Chomsky says much about troop withdrawal. He just wrote a whole book on this, Camelot Revisited and all that. But he says very little about troop escalation, other than to offer Roger Hilsman's speculation that Kennedy might well have introduced U.S. troops, ground troops in South Vietnam. Maybe so, maybe not. In fact, the same Hilsman noted in the New York Times not long ago, and Chomsky doesn't note it, that in 1963, Kennedy was the only person in his administration who opposed the introduction of U.S. ground troops. He was the only thing preventing an escalation of the war. Forget the question of withdrawal or not withdrawal. He was a barrier in that sense. Whether or not there are certain left analysts who think Kennedy was or wasn't a progressive or liberal and thinks that the CIA had no reason to kill him or other people had no reason to be dissatisfied with him, the fact is, do they see it that way? You know, entrenched interests are notorious for not seeing the world the same way that left analysts do. In 1963, people in right-wing circles, including elements in various intelligence organizations, did not believe that Kennedy could be trusted with the nation's future. Now, some months ago on a San Francisco talk show, I heard a guy come on. It was on KGO, and he said, "I've never said this before. I never said it. It's the first time I'm saying it. But I worked for Army intelligence. And in 1963, I was in Japan, and the accepted word around then was that Kennedy would be killed because he was messing too much with the intelligence community. And when word came of his death, we were, all I could hear were delighted comments like, 'We got the bastard.'" What JFK's enemies saw was something different from what Chomsky and Coburn have seen. They fixed on Kennedy's refusal to provide air coverage, the Bay of Pigs, his refusal to go in with U.S. forces, his unwillingness to launch another invasion of Cuba, his no invasion guarantee to Khrushchev on Cuba, his atmospheric test ban treaty with Moscow, his American University speech calling for a re-examination of our Cold War attitudes toward the Soviet Union, his unwillingness to send ground forces in a massive form into Vietnam.
This list is similar to the one in this book. I mean, many of the same points are made there. Like, these are all the reasons that the national security state had motive to get rid of him. He was a problem.
He does seem to kind of contradict himself in the last couple minutes, though, because he initially says, "I have no disagreement with Chomsky's characterization of Kennedy." It seems like, essentially, like, I also don't see him.
No, he's saying, yes, he was a Cold Warrior.
Yes, exactly.
He was into counterinsurgency. He did send the initial, peacekeeping troops into Vietnam. But over time, he changed, he hesitated, he had doubts about, and he was moving in the direction of peace. So he's not saying, like, overnight JFK became Mahatma Gandhi or whatever. Mahatma Gandhi. Or I don't know, pick your favorite peacenik.
Jesus Christ.
It's not like he became JFK became JC. But he just hold on for a minute or two, because he gives some great examples of elites who are taken out by other elites when they become a problem.
The antitrust suit against General Electric, his fight with U.S. Steel over price increases, his challenge to the Federal Reserve Board, his warm reception at labor conventions, his call for racial equality and responsiveness to civil rights leaders, reluctant responsiveness, his talk of moving forward in a new frontier. Erwin Knoll, the progressive, says that he admits he has no idea who killed Kennedy. But this doesn't keep him from asserting
I don't know this guy, Erwin Knoll. You heard of him?
The Oliver Stone film was manipulative and that Stone provided false answers. How do you know that, Erwin, if you have no idea who killed Kennedy? And the remarkable thing about Erwin Knoll and Noam Chomsky and Alexander Cockburn is they don't know a damn thing about the criticisms and investigation that's been made. We've said this again and again. In the rebuttals and the exchange in the nation, almost every one of them said Alexander Cockburn doesn't know anything about this case. He doesn't know anything about Lee Harvey Oswald, really. He doesn't know just some of the questions I brought up. They don't know anything, and they never deny it. They never say anything. They go on with their patronizing comments. Well, Chomsky, patronization and condescension. Cockburn with vitriol and venom. They go on attacking those who supposedly are idealizing Kennedy. Erwin Knoll shows he's flexible, though. He says he allows that the Warren Commission did a hasty, slipshod job of investigation. I disagree. The commission did a brilliant job of investigation. It sat for 51 long sessions over a period of several months, much longer than most major investigations. It compiled 26 volumes of testimony and evidence. It had the investigative resources of the FBI and CIA at its command. Far from being hasty and slipshod, it painstakingly crafted theories that moved toward its foreordained conclusion, that Oswald was the assassin. It framed an argument and moved unfailingly to fulfill that argument. It failed to call witnesses who saw something different from what it wanted to hear, who not only heard, but who saw people on the grassy knoll shooting. It failed to call them. It ignored or reinterpreted what little conflicting testimony that did creep into its proceedings. All this took deliberate effort. It was carefully crafted, painstakingly. A hasty, slipshod investigation would show traces of randomness in its errors. Some would go this way, some would go that way. But the commission's distortions consistently move in the same direction in pursuit of a prefigured hypothesis. The gullible U.S. public that Erwin Knoll talks about. Knoll condemns Oliver Stone for playing on the gullibility of the American people. See, he's not gullible. He's cool. He doesn't fall for this. He's so cool that he didn't even go see the movie, you see. The U.S. public has not bought the official explanation. 78% say they believe there was a conspiracy. And both Chomsky and Cockburn in The Nation, Chomsky in Z Magazine, and again in a letter in exchange with me, both of them dismiss that fact and point out the same identical analog. They point out that, in fact, over 70% of the people also believe in miracles. So what does that prove? And what does that got to do with the question at hand? That people can have a stupid opinion about one thing doesn't mean they're stupid about everything. In fact, Chomsky and Cockburn are themselves evidence of that.
Okay, that's an interesting point. There's one thing that we passed over. Actually, in 1976, there was a U.S. House of Representatives Select Committee on Assassinations, and he touches on this. They actually admit, this is crazy, this came out, so the HSCA, this is from Wikipedia, that CIA site, the HSCA completed its investigation in 1978 and issued its final report in 1979, which concluded that Kennedy, quote, was probably assassinated as a result of a conspiracy, unquote. So, like, they admitted it, man. Officially. That Oswald didn't act alone, but people are still talking about that, you know? That,
Come on,
like,
man.
that's like not... like people forget that. I'd probably seen that before, but I forgot about it too. Like I think at the museum, even LBJ was speculating, yeah, there was probably a conspiracy. And some people say that, LBJ was at least had knowledge of it. But anyway, I don't know if we need to play more. I just wanted to point out that he mentioned some other important people who, like Kennedy, were part of the ruling elite, but when they stepped out of line, they got whacked. So he mentions, well, he talks about Dreyfus in the Dreyfus affair. He wasn't
That was
whacked.
a nice Proust
He
shout out.
he wasn't whacked, right? But people like he was a conservative, militarist, like politically people that supported him wouldn't have been sympathetic to him, but the fact that he was the victim of this anti-Semitic campaign led them to support him. So we shouldn't have supported him because we didn't agree with all his politics. No, he was still the victim of injustice, right? And then, like he mentions, the president of and not president, but I think Aquino in the Philippines was some government official,
Like
maybe
a bishop, no?
no, that's later. In the Philippines, there's Aquino who I think was a senator, and I think he was assassinated by Marcos, and so Aquino wasn't like a great hero of the left, but he was whacked by the deep state or the power elite, and so people rallied around his memory. But yeah, you're thinking of Archbishop Romero, who was a child of the elite. He became Archbishop. They all came and kissed his ring or whatever. They gave him gifts. Then he started talking about the poor and saying, well, socialism is not so bad after all. And then he's fucking murdered. So they won't tolerate any dissent among their ranks. If you're not fully on board with the program, you could get whacked. And maybe, as you say, that's what was attempted with Trump last year. I mean, that's not impossible. But I think he has done enough for the elites to, and look what happens. Like he says we're going to have these tariffs, and then his billionaire buddies say that's not a good idea, and he's like, oh, okay, we're not going to do that. It's like most of them probably realize he's quite malleable, and he's owned by Miriam Adelson, right? How much of a threat is he to the deep state?
Sure. Come on,
so
man.
Yeah. So anyway,
Sorry.
You've said that quite a few times.
It's just so fun.
Yeah, it is. All right. So he mentions also Peter Dale Scott. He's a very important researcher into questions of the deep state. If you've never read any of his books or articles, I recommend him. But yeah, final thoughts. We can wrap it up. I'm going to go ahead and close this out. Here's our two ugly mugs.
I'm looking good today, man. I'm wearing my Arsenal shirt. We just beat Real Madrid last week, so this is like a huge moment in our club's history. Best
Congrats.
Moment in 20 years, yeah. And you're looking fine yourself, sir. So, no shame in our game. Final thoughts. I'm hyped for the next episode because I've got like a tasty concept. So I'll let you give some final thoughts on this particular topic, and then I will whet the reader's appetite for what's coming next.
Well, tell us what it is.
Okay, so kind of inspired by this hip-hop podcast I've been watching. This is a very self-indulgent idea, but basically I've chosen 64 musical artists and bands that are important for me. By no means the best. I'm not trying to make any ridiculous claim like these are the best artists. They're just my best artists in terms of significance. So then live on the show, I'm going to put all these names into a hat. Live on the show, Liliana's going to draw them out. I'm going to then place them into brackets like, the NCAA tournament.
Wait, they're just yours? I don't get a say-so?
Well, you get to have your own show after that, for example, where we do yours.
Okay.
We can discuss. So if you want, we could do we each get to contribute 32. That could be more fun, actually. I was thinking one episode would be completely for me, and then you could do one after. But we'll discuss the logistics. But either way, then as this 64 team bracket with an element of randomness, which I like. So, it could be that you're knocking out Elton John in the first round if he gets paired up with Michael Jackson, So it's not necessarily that.
No.
Regardless, you get the idea. And we're also going to have, hopefully, if you don't mind, my sister will join because she has a fairly common language with me in terms of the music that I listen to. It's going to be, I don't expect you to be able to do the homework to listen to every one of my 64 artists and have something to say about them. But either way, we'll always have votes of 2-1. So it may be me and my sister ganging up on you a lot, or not.
What's is it all genres or just
all
hip-hop?
Genres?
Oh,
all
okay.
genres, yeah.
But how many genres are we recognizing?
Anything. I even considered bringing in some classical composers, but they didn't make the cut for
Why
me.
Why not?
For me, because I have 64 artists that are more important.
Do you have any jazz artists?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
I need to see the list before I agree to this, because I think we should do 32-32.
Well,
you do 32, I do 32.
Unless we bring in my sister as well, in which case we should give her some as well.
Why 64?
Because it's fun. It's a huge number, an absurdly huge number, and then it's also the same as the college tournament, So, and it goes down pretty quick. These guys, they've dealt with 64. This podcast, they do it with hip hop albums, and they get through the whole conversation in 90 minutes. So
okay.
But the reason I thought it'd be good to have 3 is that we have tiebreakers each time.
Okay.
So we'll discuss the logistics, but something like that. And we got to figure out the technology too, because we need to be able to type PowerPoint or type in slides live so that the viewer can see what's going on. And I hope that's not too complex.
It probably is, but maybe we can figure it out.
Or we'll go ghetto and just keep showing a piece of paper that we've written on.
That sounds better.
Okay.
All right. This has been season 4.
You don't want to give a final thought on the assassination?
Episode 5. Well, if you believe the official story, you're just not paying attention or you're willfully ignorant. Any disagreement there?
Not at all.
Yeah. But yeah, I think Parenti is a great commentator. I don't know. I think he might still be alive, but he's probably in his 90s now. But yeah, he opened my eyes to some of the shortcomings of Chomsky and other commentators like Coburn. I just prefer his analysis. I think he's absolutely right that the gangster nature of the state, it's not like the first tool in the toolbox, but when all else goes wrong, when people don't vote correctly, right, they can make use of that tool to shape things in the way that they think they need to be shaped. All right, it's been season 4, episode 5. Our text was the great Michael Parenti's The JFK Assassination and the Gangster Nature of the State. That was a lecture from 1993 and is still relevant today in 2025, as I hope we have demonstrated. I'm Mark Will in Taipei. I was joined by
The Umbrella
the Umbrella Man in St. Petersburg. Do you want to explain that quickly? I know what you're alluding to, but...
And Hanya says, can't say I'm particularly interested in this event in history, but nice to be introduced to Michael Parenti.
Fair enough.
I'll let the listener research the Umbrella Man. I'm
Oh,
gonna
it's
stay
a
enigmatic.
mystery. It's a mystery. Okay. All right. Good for you. Yeah. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. Follow us on Substack. I'm at Mark Will Wright, WRITE.substack.com. He's at tomekb.substack.com. This has been Texting. We'll see you next time.
Peace.
Texting.